Hey guys, welcome back to my channel and thank you so much for watching. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this Star Wars themed cake, so let's get right into it. I'm starting out with two 6-inch cakes that I've leveled and cut in half, and I'm going to be filling those with some Swiss meringue buttercream. I have pink buttercream, it's just left over, so it does not need to be pink, I just had some extra. I'm using my small offset spatula to make sure my buttercream is nice and level, and then once my cake is stacked up, I'm going to do a crumb coat on the outside, so just a thin layer of my buttercream all around my cake, and then that's going to go in the fridge for about 25 minutes to chill. Once you can touch your finger to the buttercream and none of it comes off, it's ready for the final ice. So I'm adding a big dollop to the top of my cake, and then using my spatula and my turntable, I'm just going around and smoothing that out until it's even. I'm adding more buttercream to the sides of my cake, and then grabbing my bench scraper, I'm scraping along the edges until those are smoothed out as well. My camera didn't film this, but for all the buttercream that accumulated on the edge of my cake, I just took my small offset spatula, kept it level, and then pulled that buttercream into the center. I'm putting my cake back in the fridge to chill, and then I'm going to start on my fondant. I'm rolling out some white on my cornstarch surface to about 1/8 of an inch thick. Then I'm going to pick my fondant up with my fondant roller and drape that over my chilled cake, and working quickly with my hands and my fondant smoother, I'm going to push all the air out from the top, and then working my way down the sides of the cake, I'm pulling out the skirt and just smoothing down all the pleats and the seams until I reach the bottom. I went over my cake one more time with my fondant smoother, and then for all the excess at the bottom, I just cut that away with my pizza cutter. My cake is going to be 2 tiers, so I need to add some support. Because it's so small, I'm just going to use regular straws, but if you have a larger cake, you need to use the larger bubble tea straws or some wooden dowels. I spaced my straws out evenly in the bottom tier, and then I just cut those down so they were going to be flush with the top. I added a smear of buttercream and then placed my 4-inch tier on top. It is a little bit shiny because I chose to paint my top tier black using some black food coloring and some food grade alcohol instead of just using black fondant because I didn't have any black fondant on hand, but you could do either method. The shininess will go down as the paint dries. To start with the decorations for the Stormtrooper, I rolled out some black fondant and I'm going to cut out the eye part of the helmet. I just looked at a picture and eyeballed this. I will link the one that I used below. I also cut out a long black thin strip of fondant as well as the mouth part of the helmet. Again, I just eyeballed this based on the picture, so it doesn't have to be like exact. Now that I have the main pieces cut out, I'm going to apply them to my cake. I'm using some shortening because if you use water and you try to apply black fondant onto white and you make a mistake, if you go to move it, it will drag the color and leave it behind, whereas shortening, you can move it and it's not going to do that. So that's just a personal preference. You can use whatever you want. So I'm adding that strip of black fondant to the very top of the cake, and then my 2 eyes and the mouth. I rolled out this long, thick rope of white fondant, and I'm wrapping that around. I want it to come pretty close to meeting in the middle of his mouth, but you don't want it to touch. You want to have a little bit of space there. Next, I cut out a large circle of black fondant, and then I cut the bottom off of that, and I place that directly underneath the center of the mouth. Using the end of a piping tip, I cut out 2 more circles of black fondant and put those on either end of that long rope of white fondant. I rolled out more of my black fondant and cut out these little rectangles and applied them to either side of my fondant rope. Between the space of the end of that, where the circle of black fondant is, and the first rectangle, I added a strip of white fondant. I cut out some really thin strips of white fondant and placed those over the mouthpiece, just spacing them out so they looked kind of like a grate. And lastly, I cut out some strips of black fondant, 3 pieces for either side, right by where his eye is, and I just cut like a larger one, a medium-sized one, and a smaller one. For the top tier, I did a really simple galaxy-like effect. So I covered the bottom tier in saran wrap just to protect it from any splatter, and then using a paintbrush and some white food coloring gel, I used Wilton brand. I just kept pulling back the bristles and splattering the black fondant. Just be careful because this can get messy. The splattering is great for creating lots of little streaks and stars, and then using the back of my paintbrush, I just dipped that into my white food coloring gel and just dotted some larger stars around the tier. To make my Yoda topper, I started out with a ball of green fondant, and then on either side of his face, I just marked in 2 holes for where his eyes are going to be. Using my X-Acto knife, I'm scoring in 2 lines on the top of his head, and then I'm going across those lines to create like a checkered, square, wrinkly pattern that he has. I will link a picture below so you have a better idea. I added 2 balls of white fondant into my eye sockets, and then 2 small circles of brown fondant into the middle of those. I grabbed some brown food coloring gel and a fine tip paintbrush, and I just painted the eyes to give them a little more depth. I just concentrated most of the color on the outside and then just dragged it a little bit into the center. I added a small ball of black fondant into the middle of my brown irises, and then another little tiny white ball just off to the side of the pupil for the cat's light. Yoda has some pretty serious eye bags, so I'm rolling out these little pieces of green fondant and then just placing those on the top and the bottom of his eye, just meeting them in the corners. And then using my X-Acto knife, I just scored in some lines. I want to shout out to Cake Duchess's video on how to make a Yoda topper. Hers was definitely a great foundation for me to figure out how to make this. You should definitely go check that out. I will link it below. I added a longer snaky of green fondant for like his brow area, and then just pressed that down in the middle. I added a little ball of fondant right below that and pressed that down, and then using my X-Acto knife, I just scored in some lines into that little piece as well as the brow bone, just to give him some more texture. His face is basically just a big mass of wrinkles. I added another little ball for his nose, and then just using a skewer, just marked in 2 little nostrils. For his mouth, I rolled out a bigger ball of fondant and pressed that right between his nose, slightly tapering the top so that it fit in right where his eyes are. And then using my X-Acto knife, I cut in the line of where the opening of his mouth would be, as well as some lines for like the wrinkles around his mouth. This part's a bit out of focus, but basically all I'm doing is going around the rest of his face and just marking in lines to make it look super aged and wrinkly. For Yoda's body, I have this brown teardrop shape that I've attached to the top of the cake using a skewer, leaving just enough room for the head to attach, and I'm just going to press that right on. I didn't use any water or anything, but you could if you want the extra security. Then using the back of my paintbrush, I'm just scoring in 2 holes on either side of his head where his ears are going to be. To make the ears, I'm starting out with a little ball of green fondant and then rolling it into kind of like a lemon shape and placing that into a little piece of a skewer. You could use dried spaghetti if you don't want to use anything that's not edible. And then I'm just shaping it to be pointy at one end and indenting the center and kind of just folding it over. It's a little hard to explain, but hopefully you get it from watching me do it. Then I just press that into the hole that I made. Again, I didn't use any water, but if you want to, you can go ahead. And then I just took a second to shape them the way I wanted them. So this is what I have so far. For his robe, I have this white rectangle of fondant that I'm just wrapping around his body and then kind of just folding the edges back to make it look like it's flapping in the wind. To make his hood, I just took another little piece of white fondant and pinched the ends together and then wrapped it around his neck. I do apologize if you can see some little hairs here and there. I got this new cloth and it's just been shedding these things. I threw it away, but I'm still seeing them on my hands and I didn't realize how bad it was until I'm watching this video and it's driving me nuts. For his arms, I have more of my white fondant. I'm starting it with a ball and then rolling out this cornucopia type shape. And then using my fingers, I'm just pulling the ends of it out to make it more open. To make his hands and feet, I have more of my green fondant and I'm rolling out a little ball into this teardrop shape and then smushing it against my counter and then just cutting in 3 little fingers and blunting the ends of those with my fingers. I used a skewer to make his lightsaber. I rolled out more of my green fondant and then just wrapped that around, leaving a little bit of room at the end for some black fondant, which I also wrapped around for more of the handle piece. And then I left a little bit of that skewer sticking out so that I could dig that into his arm so it'll stay still. I added 2 little skewers into his hands and then stuck those into his sleeves. And then it took me a little finagling to get the hands to go around the lightsaber and hold everything in place. If you find that you need a little bit of extra support, you can use some piping gel. Mine stayed pretty well, so I was happy with it, but you could also do that if you need to. I popped his feet on and then I rolled out some yellow fondant and cut out the Star Wars logo using a template that I made for myself and just placed that on the front of my top tier using some shortening. And this was the final result, guys. I really liked how this cake turned out. I think it looks really snazzy, but it's not that hard to do. So if the thought of doing like a carved Stormtrooper helmet is really daunting, then this is the cake design for you. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for new videos every week. I will see you in the next one.